Petros, and also from my part, good morning or good evening to everyone here. Together with you, I'm very much looking forward to the upcoming 3 days and learning about what is going on in the field of Byzantine studies at this time. We will start off with a book that I think that many among us will welcome very much. The book Greek and Latin Letters in Late Antiquity, The Christianization of a Literary Form. It's co-authored by Pauline Allen and Bronwen Neal. It will be very welcome because, as many of us know, there's no such a thing as a comprehensive overview of the genre of the letter in late antiquity. And actually, it's even fair to say that the genre for this period has barely been studied in its entirety. And this book does exactly that. It's a synthesis of everything of insights that can be related to the genre of the letter in late antiquity. So it has grown, I think, into a very rich volume, offering very precious insights for many of us. Me personally, I was very much taken in by some of the observations in the book. For example, how the letter clearly shows how the distinction between the public and the private breaks down in this period. How letters are also circulating among people beyond, let's say, the nominal recipients, and become thus, in a certain sense, public documents, and are also used like this. Letters being used in synods and councils is a very good example of that. We also get a very fascinating view on issues of travel and communication in the still vast Roman Empire of that time, and communications also between the East and the West. I also think that many people will be interested in the issues of authenticity and forgery of letters that the book discusses, and the issue of gender, how gender and the relationships between gender impact the relationships between senders and recipients. Also, the very important and increasing role, intellectual role of the bishop and other church leaders in this time is elucidated very much by this book. And throughout the book, you really get a sense of what the subtitle promises: the Christianization of a literary form. You can see how Christian church leaders, how they appropriated techniques and features of the genre of epistolography for their own purposes, to strengthen communities, to settle doctrinal questions, and so on and so forth. So I'm very glad to welcome Bronwen Neal and to invite her to present her book. I should mention that that good evening with which I began this talk, it's also intended for her. For her, it's actually still Thursday evening, so we should be grateful to her to join us at an hour that is not exactly very convenient for her. Bronwen Neal is professor of ancient history at Macquarie University in Australia. She has already co-edited with Pauline Allen in 2015 the volume Collecting Early Christian Letters, which, as many of us know, is a very useful volume. And she has also co-written with Pauline Allen the book Crisis Management in Late Antiquity. She has also published many more articles and books, being interested in the issues of crisis management in late antiquity, the role of church leaders, the genre of epistolography, and recently also the topic of dreams in early Byzantium. I don't think I need to reiterate the practical guidelines that Petros has already communicated to us. So please remember to mute your microphones and to post your questions in the Q&A box that is intended for that. And then we have more or less 15 minutes for the Q&A session. And now we are very curious to hear Bronwen Neal talk about her recent book. I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Floris. Thank you for chairing, and thanks to the organisers, especially Petros, for having the initiative to bring together so many wonderful speakers and chairs and audience. So it's an honour to be here, and I'm particularly honoured to be opening the event. I think there was a practical consideration there because it's 9 p.m. here right now, the middle of summer, and I really wasn't about to stay up any later on a Friday night, so they have to put me on first. But thank you very much. I need to apologise for Pauline Allen, my co-author of this book. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to be here tonight. She has retired, but we're still in touch, and she sends her best wishes to the organisers. So the three things we were asked to cover by Petros were to give a brief introduction to the main argument and our contribution in this volume, to summarise how the project originated, and to tell you about some of the most interesting or intriguing aspects that we found in our research. Now, I do feel that Floris has left me with very little to say. I think he's really picked out the highlights, so I thank you for that. But nevertheless, I'll do my best. So a brief introduction to our main argument. The 4th century is rightly seen as a time when letter writing exploded in the Roman world, and many more letters were preserved either singly or in random collections or in collections curated by the authors for posterity. Our aim in this book was to produce the first general study of Greek and Latin letter writing in late antiquity, which for our purposes is 300 to 600 CE. Since the publication of Gilles Constable's synthesis of medieval letters, there have been lots of studies of Byzantine letters, studies of individual authors like Margaret Mallett's seminal work on Theophylact of Ohrid, and I'm very pleased that she's here tonight. And now the Brill Companion to Byzantine Epistolography, edited by Alexander Rieler, as well as collections of essays on letter collections in late antiquity, but until now, no synthetic study of late antique letter exchange. So that was the gap that we sought to fill. Our subject was early Christian Greek and Latin literary letters, so that excludes documentary letters, their nature and their function. We looked at the age-old question of genre and decided it was better to speak of letters as a literary form. We mined the letters themselves for evidence of the mechanics of their production and dissemination, mostly through slave letter bearers. In the book, we examine the exchange of letters between men, mostly bishops, senators, emperors, and monks, and the rarer phenomenon of letter exchanges with women and between women. We look at the transmission of letter collections and what they can tell us about friendships and other social networks between the elite leaders who wrote letters in the 4th to 6th centuries, including a couple of pagan senators like Symmachus and Libanius. The volume gives a broad context to late antique literary letter writing in Greek and Latin in its various manifestations: political, ecclesiastical, practical, and social. In the process, the differences between pagan and Christian letter writing are shown to be not as great as has previously been supposed. So my second question is, how did this project originate and how long did it take to complete? The short answer is a very long time. It was the fruit of 30 years' labour on letters for Pauline Allen and about 18 years for me. We first had to read over 2,000 Latin and Greek letters and a few hundred in Syriac. My first late antique letters were in a Latin translation of Greek, Latin translations of a Greek letter by Maximus the Confessor to his disciple Anastasius, and of another letter by Anastasius Apocrisiarius in exile to the followers of Maximus the Confessor. This might sound a bit boring, but in the first case, Maximus is writing from prison in Constantinople, and it gives you an interesting insight into how important letters were for those who were prisoners of the state to keep their networks alive. The second example was written allegedly by a miraculous intervention after Anastasius had his right hand cut off in Constantinople. He was then sent into exile in Lazica and had to attach a reed to his arm to allow him to write at all without a hand. This awakened an interest in the mechanics of letter writing and letter sending. I then got to work on the letters of the papal librarian and Latin translator Anastasius Bibliothecarius to his various patrons, explaining what he had translated for them and why. This piqued my interest as to the political motivations behind the choice of translations of letters and other documents in 9th century Rome. And I went on to do a study of the 2 letters of Pope Martin from prison in Constantinople, where he complains about getting dysentery on the boat on the way over from Rome and how he couldn't take any of his servants with him, and then wrote 2 more letters from exile where he complains that he couldn't get any wine or oil from the locals, and they didn't even understand what bread was in Kherson. That led me into further studies of papal letters and their exchanges with the East. So I discovered that letters are a good way to get to the human heart of people in conflict, and especially those in exile. And they also reflect aspects of social networks and daily life that you can't find anywhere else. So what was the most intriguing aspect of our research? I've got 4 things to mention here. First, the differences between ancient and late antique letters in terms of audience are not very great, but there is a new capacity in late antiquity to write to women previously unknown to the author, and to write to women of higher status than the author. For example, bishops write to imperial women such as queen mothers, emperors' wives and sisters, or other aristocratic women at court, who in some sense act as spies for them. They seem to be swapping information, gaining information from the Byzantine court and sending it back to the popes in Rome, for instance. We also have some replies from these women, a rare opportunity to hear about them in their own voice. Second, letters can tell us about other kinds of people who don't often turn up in the literary record. For example, slaves, including letter bearers. There is a big difference between classical letters which avoid the particular and revel in philosophical abstractions, and late antique letters which convey high levels of detail on practical matters, such as Pope Gelasius' letter instructing his agents to get the trees trimmed on the border of a papal estate. So some of them are terribly prosaic, and it's a shock when you first come across a papal letter like this. You think, gee, didn't they have anything better to do? Third, epistolary forgeries, and Floris picked this up, even obvious forgeries seem to be acceptable if they're in the interests of the faith or the church, just as fake origin stories for saints and holy places are commonplace in hagiography. Made-up letters can be embedded in narratives to help the argument along, such as in Eusebius' Historia Ecclesiastica. At a conservative estimate, about 50% of letters in Christian histories are forged or falsely attributed, and maybe a lot more. And fourth, the range of gifts sent along with letters was interesting and varied. It was intriguing to see how it reflected the relationship between sender and recipient as the friendship waxed and waned. Margaret Mullett has commented on gifts as part of the ritual exchange of Byzantine letter writing. And a great example of this, I think, is a Gallic letter from a bishop sending a friend an old horse along with the letter, so that the friend has a means of returning a reply to this letter, and he doesn't have an excuse anymore for not writing. So I hope this has given you some idea of what we hope to achieve in this book, and that it piques your own interest in late antique and Byzantine letter writing. Thanks for listening, and I'd be very happy to have questions.